The rise of the feminine energy is not about castrating the masculine energy. It is about balance.
Thank you for coming. Thank you for staying. I'm here to share with you the beautiful transmissions from the walls of my cavernous heart and to witness the great frequency shift that we are moving into as a collective and the beautiful deep work that we are doing as we glide into the age of Aquarius. This is the Liminal Frequencies podcast. Let's go.
Let me tell you about the birth of Venus. The birth of Venus was a result of a defeat of a primordial god by the name of Uranus. So, Uranus means the crown jewel of the heavens, which is ironic because it's the opposite of the anus. So, we have an interesting dichotomy here between the earth and the stars, and all of us being one. We can feel that connection. Uranus was defeated by his castration. Making Venus was a result of the sea foam that arose after Saturn castrated his father Uranus, and his blood fell to the sea. So it's interesting how this, I believe, happens in other cultures and traditions too, where Eve was Adam's rib. So yeah, mythology can be a little messed up, but it is interesting to see this feminine frequency as it continues to come online. And yeah, the cock of Uranus is pretty badass. So why wouldn't Venus be? So I wanted to connect today as we are moving into this interesting reset of the feminine and the masculine, which I believe started with the solar eclipse in Libra. And it created this calibration of our feminine frequencies. For me personally, feeling where I was showing up, that I wasn't being received or I wasn't being reciprocated. I want to read to you a archetype from Kim Cran's Archetype Guidebook. The sustainer, the peacemaker, the upholder, the preserver. The sustainer is the second archetype in the trio of existence. It works behind the scenes, tending to the tasks of life. They cultivate gardens, pay bills, keep the meals warm, and the mouths sweetly fed. The sustainer is at peace in the process of life, knowing there's no start or finish to humble yet meaningful tasks. They have a natural inclination to nourish others, to archive, to preserve Earth's resources, to consider environmental impact, to see their role in the divine cycle of life. It's common for the sustainer to become overworked, leading to resentment. Their tasks aren't glamorous, and therefore the sustainer rarely receives the credit or attention. The sustainer longs to hold things in place so badly, especially relationships, that they resist necessary change. Take time with this archetype. It is within us and needs all of our love. When light, abundant, generous, supportive, and reliable. When dark, overworked, resentful, trapped, and tired. Go deeper with Lakshmi, Vishnu, and Demeter. Lakshmi being the goddess of prosperity and abundance, coming out of also being reborn into this lake, I believe, holding lotuses. Vishnu, which is her husband, and Demeter, which is the goddess of fertility and agriculture, who lost her daughter Persephone, who was kidnapped and taken into the underworld with Hades. And this was an interesting story of finding herself and finding the ability to laugh again, which restored life to all of the lands. Her withdrawal into grief destroyed all of the crops, which is interesting that we talk about in this episode the unpacked grief that we don't know where it came from. And how can we release that grief? How can we cry those tears if, like Demeter, we're so in shock that we can't release it, that it becomes like a tumor? Tumors being ungrieved, solidified tears. Contemplate what truly sustains you. Make a list. Notice how simple yet powerful those things are, and spend some time tending them. So this is interesting. When we connect with the sustainer, we're connecting with the Earth Mother, connecting with the things that sustain us. We're connecting with the protection of the earth that we provide. And it also can be somewhat masculine archetype, as the male archetype is the provider. And so how can we recalibrate, rewild, and rewire our nervous systems in order to exist within the framework of a polarity, which clearly clearly Venus being born from the cock of Uranus shows us that the polarity is a powerful force towards our evolution and towards our human life that we live. It just makes the world spin. So get your snorkel because you're going to want that snorkel as we dive deep into the waters of Venus and her rebirth from Uranus's castrated testicles. How is everybody out there? How is the water temperature? I noticed when Pluto went into Aquarius the very first day, there was a big storm forecasted. And there was a lot of like sideways rain and winds. It seemed to blow over in some places, in some parts of the Olympic Peninsula where I live. It seemed to take out power lines and some people were offline. But generally, there was just a flicker of lights where I was, and it seemed to be a little bit dramatic for what actually transpired. But it was really interesting to me seeing as Aquarius is the water bearer and seeing as this started a really big shift, and a really big shift that's been happening for a while, that we've been sensing, that we've been feeling. And I wanted to bring this into the energy of the feminine and how we have been honoring and unearthing the feminine in our lives and in society. And I have noticed people have been reporting to me that there's been this masculine energy, this sort of backlash energy that's been coming through. And the rise of the feminine energy is not about castrating the masculine energy. It is about balance. And I myself experiences growing up, I've definitely experienced a feminine energy that is out of balance, that is way too masculine, that is bickering and controlling of the masculine, that wants to show up. So in addition to having this imbalance already, there's this wounded masculine that comes from the rise of the feminine. There is a prophecy. It's a native prophecy. However, I've seen Abdul Bahi saying a similar thing, in that the bird of humanity consists of a wing that is masculine and a wing that is feminine. And for a long time, humanity has been flying on the male wing and just going in circles. And the prophecy sees the bird of humanity unfurling and flying as one being. So that's a beautiful thing to see. And I feel that we have been seeing this unfurl throughout many years, but especially in the time that I've been paying attention in the last couple of years, feeling this feminine frequency shift and seeing men showing up in men's groups It's so beautiful. There is some mythology that relates to the initiation of the age of Aquarius. And that is Zeus, who disliked the age of bronze. It was too warlike and violent. And he wanted to initiate a great flood to usher in a new age. And it seems that he may have spared Pyrrha and Deucalion, and they were able to repopulate the world by taking the bones of Gaia, which were these stones, and they would throw them over their shoulders into the water. And it's interesting how this flooding happened and how this age of Aquarius was ushered in by a flood. I was looking into Pyrrha, the goddess, and she is actually a human. She was Pandora's daughter. And if any of you guys know, Pandora is kind of similar to this Garden of Eden story with Eve. Prometheus stole fire from the heavens. I believe by stole, they actually mean he just co-opted. But he stole fire from the heavens. Zeus was unhappy that they got fire on planet Earth, and he commissioned a woman to be created. And the woman was Pandora. And Pandora, in this original translation, it was a jar. She had a jar of evil and plague and storms and all the negativity in the world. And of course, being a woman, being fatally flawed, she unveiled these evils on all of the lands, and people suffered greatly from it. Now, I channeled something about Pandora in working towards this activation that I created. And this activation was to work with the frequencies of Pandora, as Pandora was holding in her box or in her jar supposedly all of the evils in the world. And the story was that before she could get out, the box closed and Hope was inside of the box. So she closed the box with Hope stuck inside, and all of the other evil got out of the box. And what's interesting is what came of this, what comes of all of the evils in the world supposedly is the gifts. And this was what my activation was about, was activating the gifts of Pandora by unpacking our boxes and going into this liminal space of meditation and frequency and unpacking that box of all of the things that we're maybe afraid to look at, the darkness. And when we unpack that darkness, we find our gifts. And this was kind of what I talked about in this episode, the first episode that I did, that was a solo show on moving from Capricorn and unpacking those gifts and those gems, dissecting them. And what I felt was there was so many gifts of my movement and my calling into service that I received from working with those energies. There was a calling for me, a deep calling for me to support humanity in struggles, that I developed that empathy. It reminds me that there is this weird study that people who take NSAIDs, acetaminophen or ibuprofen, that they don't have as much empathy, and that numbing of the pain response that we have can actually numb us of the really good quality of our empathy, that we can connect to others, that we can feel exactly what they're feeling. And so it's really interesting to unpack those gifts and to see this arc, this narrative arc of our journey from this really disempowered place that women have been in for centuries and for lifetimes, and quote unquote witch wound that women have, that they've been persecuted and they've been in cages and they've been executed for the gifts that they've been utilizing. And how today, us often carrying some of that energy, that ancestral weight of what's happened to us in past lives, which maybe not everybody fully takes in that or believes. It's a choice to believe that, but also ancestrally, where we were sharing a womb space with our mother and our grandmother. We were sharing DNA and we were sharing our genes. We wore the same jeans. And when we came out, we were like, these jeans are scratchy. I don't like them. They make me uncomfortable. There was a study with cherry blossoms where the mice were smelling cherry blossoms or maybe the essential oils of cherry blossoms. And right after they smelled the cherry blossoms, they gave them an electric shock and they reproduced. And generations down, the smell of cherry blossoms would cause them to produce cortisol. So there are some really deep unconscious things that we continue to unpack. And that is my healing journey, is realizing, okay, I've done the Western medicine thing. Great. Good job. I've done the Eastern medicine thing. I've done the acupuncture and the herbs and the nutritional therapy and the mindfulness. And then moving into the more alternative stuff, I was driven towards this EMDR. I guess some people might think this was kind of out there, but it really is just using your eye movements, which I believe my eye movements have been very helpful in me when I need to rewire something in my brain, when I need to move something in my nervous system. And the eyes connect to the dura. So it makes sense that this would help us to move the body, things flowing a little bit better. The dura is a fluid that bathes our spinal cord. So it's connecting many parts of our body. And then when I was working with that, I was ready to move into those darker pieces with working with plant medicine, Mother Ayahuasca, grandmother, and find ways to unpack Pandora's box. I've often heard people say they're afraid what they're going to find in a journey like that. They're afraid of that darkness. And I had a facilitator say, well, I think it's scarier not to go there. I think it's scarier to have these things lodged in your nervous system unconsciously and not feel where they're going. And that's not to say that everybody should have the same path and that there's ways of exploring the unconscious, but to really suspend your ego's involvement in what's going on in your agenda and just let go and be facilitated by grandmother, by the spirit guides that come through, by the human helpers that are supporting you, by the plant medicines, the master plants, and also the helper plants that are available to support you in those processes. And so that was a big part of my healing journey, was to let go and to receive that support from an entity outside of myself, and having this agenda of this is how I'm going to heal. Here's my list. Here's all of the therapies that I'm going to implement. For me, after working with grandmother, included combo, which I will be releasing a podcast about with Shanna, combo practitioner. Really interesting stuff. And what appealed to that for me was a way of purging physically and energetically, emotionally at the same time. And so through this process of going through a ceremony where you have these dots put on you and you have the incense stick and it burns just the outside layer of your skin, so your skin is more permeable. This is a frog secretion from the Amazon, from the Matsis tribe is where this particular medicine came from. And to initiate a experience in the body that causes the body to release toxins. And it's a very short process, about a half an hour after the dots are on, you're already ready to rest and you've hopefully purged, puked. You drink a lot of water, so it's almost more uncomfortable not to get that water out of your system. So you get a little bit water full, and then you are moving through in a ceremony in a held space with drumming, with sounds, being cleansed. Sometimes they cleanse you with tobacco in these ceremonies, but it is a very feminine energy, and it can also, in a way, be masculine, or possibly the way that I was going about it was masculine in a way. It's time to move this energy and move these toxins, and this is how I'm going to do it. And I feel that we're in a healing portal right now with Pluto moving into Aquarius. It feels like a lot of things are coming online that are just ready to move rather spontaneously, but also receiving help from helpers is important. And I believe what I've seen in my practice is that when you turn a light on, when you have a flashlight, when the person has a flashlight, when you are seeing and self seeing and doing some freaking shadow work, things are so much easier to come through. And with the help of the solar flares, it has felt like 1 week I sense how much energy is moving with the solar flares, and all of these loved ones, these departed loved ones, are coming through wanting to communicate during sessions, or other data is coming online in the body, people with cords and contracts, and sometimes implants or devices that want to be removed. And these blockages that we have, think about a blockage that you have in your body that you really just can't get past. It continues to be an issue for you. What level and what layer is this blockage on? Where is it in your field? And how can you move through it by shifting your perspective on, is it actually a physical thing? Have you been going to the chiropractor or doing doing visceral manipulation or doing physical therapy or acupuncture, and nothing is really changing with it? Or are you working with it on a spiritual level? Are you seeing yourself? So, one of my favorite books, reference guides, I will say at this point, I tend to read in a way of, I just look at exactly what needs to be seen by me in this particular moment. And I woke up on Thanksgiving with an ingrown toenail, which is great. Also, Mars is going retrograde. So that's an interesting dynamic of how I work with my energy and my body, and how this exercise and movement is so important to me and is super helpful for moving my energy, and how Mars going in retrograde could impede that and say, okay, you have to find another way to work with this energy. You have to do more breath work. You have to do more toning. It says, worry and guilt about your rights to move forward. It is Louise Hay, You Can Heal Your Life. It is my divine right to take my own direction in life. I am safe. I am free. And it's interesting because when I woke up with this, I said, I chose this. This is my choice. And this is an experience I must have wanted to have, because I had told a client that I believe everything's a choice. Yeah, you have to go to work, but you're choosing that particular path in life. And there's few things that you really have to do that you don't have a choice. Yeah, I could skip a court date, and yeah, I could end up in jail, and that's all a choice. So I'm choosing to go. But no matter what you believe, you still have the ability to receive and harvest the gifts from this choice. So, what's interesting about this choice was I had this beautiful night at an ecstatic dance on the Olympic Peninsula. And I just love how this event was facilitated, started with yoga, continued with dance. There's such a silly vibration connecting with a lot of people and finding all of my new best friends in the room with me and having moments with everybody. And the music was beautiful. The music embodied this divine feminine energy that I've been working with. And after the dance, they had a sound bath, which I do facilitate sound journeys. And I never call them sound baths because I say your frequency is not dirty. You don't need a sound bath. But after this event, I realized I had to go and fill up gas or diesel for my van so that my heater would work in the morning when I woke up. And I hadn't really had dinner. My day had kind of been pushed forward with some shift in my schedule, like Mercury retrograde, just spontaneously needing to flow with the changes and not realizing that I would shoot myself in the foot later. This is my left foot. This is the feminine side. So, flowing with this, I know that a couple of days ago, Mars moved retrograde, and Mars is in Leo, which is a nice place for Mars to express divine masculine energy, white horse kind of stuff. But shortly after that, Venus moved into Aquarius from Capricorn, and Venus was riding the same wave as Pluto in that particular time of Pluto moving into Aquarius. So now we have even more feminine frequencies coming online and masculine frequencies resetting and waiting for the feminine frequency to make the first move. And it's interesting that I say make the first move because I noticed in my experiences with growing up that men did not really make the first move. And there's this huge shift for the feminine to just do everything, just to show up for that. Because, yeah, you're empowered now, you can do that. And there was a backlash to the movement into feminism. And I don't see feminism as necessarily feminist, if that makes any sense. Yes, feminism is supporting the feminine, but the feminist movement itself, in basically getting women out of the kitchen and into the workplace where they would make three quarters to the dollar of what a man makes, and then asking them to show up for both responsibilities now, asking them to do the mothering and the parenting, and also to show up and pay the bills and be part of that world. I believe this shift wasn't super helpful for women. And now I believe we're trying to recalibrate that by taking a step back. And my injuries around the time of, I mentioned the ceremony, slightly before that, when I was working with a trauma that I feel like led me into the beautiful arms of grandmother, I was in a toxic relationship. I didn't know what gaslighting meant, but I started to learn about all of those things and all of the ways that, I had grown up with a beautiful and a lovely family, but also knowing that we gravitate towards similar energies. And this particular person was kind of an addict. I don't believe I have too much addiction in my family, just a general normalization of just being intoxicated on holidays or during family gatherings. And so it wasn't a stranger to me to see somebody who was also behaving that way, to have friends that were also behaving that way, and then to be in a place of complete dysregulation, living with this person that was throwing temper tantrums, that had some mercury filling poisoning, that was just really uncomfortable for me. And I started to just shape up and realize I need to set these boundaries. I need to have my own space away from somebody who has this toxic energy. And when I finally got free, when I finally moved out of this situation, I just went straight for the mountains and the harder play, which I love. It's a beautiful thing and it's a beautiful place for me. But I failed to really cushion myself in the grief and being received by this loving tenderness and this energy. And I believe the second I got my van, her name is Vanessa. She's a sprinter. I know. I saw stickers that said, not another Prius. When I had a Prius, and then I got a sprinter, and the sticker said, not another sprinter, the bumper stickers. But I absolutely love it. It has just softened me. I have obviously got the sprinter to go on adventures as well as to have a little office space, a little setup for sleeping in between visiting clients, going to conferences, going to workshops. I am planning on taking that van down to Nevada for a workshop. I took the van to California for a dissection lab and saw my family, sat with grandmother, and had these beautiful experiences just being held by this container. And my Venus is in Cancer, which it spells somebody who is just very interested in being nourished and being loved in a more of a motherly way, more of a deeper emotional vibe, more of a home cooked dinner vibe than a let's take you out to the most fabulous restaurant and wine you and dine you. And I have had friends that said, all these guys, they keep taking me out for expensive dinners and giving me gifts and all these special things. And they say, hey, where's your Venus? And they say, it's in Leo. They say, yeah, that's normal for you to experience that. And that must be nice. But for me, it's felt like being more supportive. And so, anyways, I am not really a homebody. And perhaps it's because the conglomeration of the sprinter and the tiny house. And I have really dropped into since Pluto went to Aquarius, which is interesting. Just being at home and being in self care mode and going into the depths of the veil and pulling things out and allowing myself to feel a little bit more realigned. But I just have not been really in a place, especially as I moved out of this toxic relationships, as I healed this, I really wanted to live my life. I felt enough of my 20s and now I'm in my 30s were spent in this vibration of toxicity and I was really ready to play. And so this became a container for me for my adventures. And the minute that I got this van, I just felt this energy of softening into things. And in my healing crisis, I was 95 pounds. I am not supposed to be that small. And I actually was famished all the time. And I think I was eating a lot. And I was eating in the middle of the night to keep my dopamine and serotonin cycles moving to where I could get more sleep because I wasn't producing the right neurotransmitters. It had to do with my underweight, my copper deficiency, all of the things, right? All of the parts and the aspects of the healing journey that we move into in order to find ourselves and in order to find what works for us. But yeah, this just looking at pictures of that time, I saw I just was a little underweight. And so the plant medicine was me dipping my toe into this journey. But then I heard about the Akashic Records. I had a practitioner do Akashic Records reading and journey for me. And I just dove deep into these places where I had been crying and I had no idea why. And my partner at the time would be like, what's up? What's going on? Do you want to talk about it? And I would be like, I wish I knew. I don't know. And a lot of it, I feel, was this ancestral grief. My mother being adopted, and I believe just from my understanding of what happened in the Akashic records, which is just the records of all that there is, this understanding, this way of channeling information and data about what happened that we may not understand, was that there was a lot of sexual abuse and there was a lot of ancestral trauma around having children and being trapped because of that. So the interesting thing in looking at this theme of moving into the feminine energy was I was absolutely not going to have kids. I was terrified of it. I still believe it may be a choice that I make, or it may not be a choice. It may be an intervention of spirit, of actually just communicating with the spirit if there is supposed to be something that comes through me, or just embracing the fact that I have this beautiful creation and everyone being my children, being people that I want to support and teach and mentor. And so I was having dreams about children. I was having dreams that my baby was in the freezer or my baby was in a public park. And these just weren't things that carried into motherhood. It didn't make sense. And it was kind of a golden shadow for me that I had to unpack. The more that I came back into my body, I came back into my menstrual flow, I could understand the desire to have kids. And I even had this breakthrough where I was, okay, this is something that, given the right circumstances and the right person, it actually would be a really beautiful thing, and being open to it. But this was packed deeply into my nervous system. This was something that had to be very deeply unearthed in order to reveal what pains and traumas were related to that. So I believe the Akashic Records really changed my life and also opened me up to being able to receive all of this information on my own, that the veils were being thinned, that I would be laying in bed and I would be doing a meditation, and all of a sudden I would remember a past life from off planet. Okay, is this normal? Here we are. So interesting. So this has been wonderful to share how we have moved into the feminine frequencies and how we are continuing to move into the feminine frequencies. And I would love to share with you. I am doing an event which I believe may manifest into other forms and evolve. And it's really exciting. But I am going to be sharing with you a poem that came through during the Libra solar eclipse, which for me was a balancing of sorts. Libra is all about balancing, and balancing how my feminine and masculine output was carrying over into my relationships and into my life, and how I could dial that back in and with my masculine energy, give to my feminine and establish the boundaries that I need to know when I'm supposed to be receiving and to know when I'm supposed to be giving. Feminine energy is all about receiving. And if you look at the archetype of the Empress, that's a really beautiful one to look at. It's a tarot card. And the Empress is all about creativity, abundance, and receiving that energy. There was a card reading that I did for myself. It was the Ten of Wands, and it was the Empress. And the way I pulled those cards was I got the Two of Swords. And the Two of Swords was basically you have a decision to make. And the decision was between living the life of the Empress and still having abundance and taking on another obligation, responsibility job, which happened when I stopped going to Bainbridge Island or in Paulsboro working. And I took a day for myself to start projects like this, to start podcasts, So that was super interesting. I'm really grateful that I chose myself in my feminine frequency. So, without further ado, here is the poem that I wrote, which led to me planning this retreat on rewilding the divine feminine. And there was also a workshop to help to support us rewilding our divine feminine. But how we can get out of this paradigm and just unlock some things that have been lodged into our nervous system in order to move more fully into the divine feminine flow. And if you are a male, this is also super beautiful to tap into because we all have feminine and we all have masculine. She belongs to the wind and the trees, blossoming with the moon to recreate the stars. To rewild her is to ignite the spark as flame engulfs her heart. Hold fast to your feminine, staying true to her nature. Let her dance among the stars, filling her cup with effervescent juiciness. When she strays from the moonlight in pursuit of the masculine, taking orders from the matrix, she dilutes her true nature, blowing smoke instead of fairy dust. Harness your own rhythm, navigating the flow, the waters of your divine timing, dancing the cosmic dance. You are the star. And when we embody our divine feminine, when we truly sense that, we don't go out of our way to pursue the masculine. We don't violate our own boundaries because that could get really freaking ugly. Look at Kali. Look at Durga. There's so many feminine archetypes that embody the rage of violation of the sacredness of our own divine feminine that we end up lashing out against that. And so much has been transpired in the last 20 years with the Me Too movement, with I just heard this hashtag, it was me, in both the feminine and the masculine being wounded in these ways by what's happened. And I think the key piece is empowerment, to step back into that empowerment of really who you are. And so I have had so much fun with you guys during this episode talking about the portals that we're opening up in the feminine frequency. And so I hope that this lands with you in a place where you are expressing yourself and you're also rewilding yourself. You're also spending time outside and looking at the moonlight, letting the stars glisten in your eyes and feeling the cold and the wind on your skin. And that you have teeth too, that you're honoring those boundaries to maintain yourself so that it's not like this crazy rabid beast that's never been let out before, which happens when we move too much into the masculine frequencies and move out of our own balance. So we talked a bit about the grief and the grieving in this episode, about how there are some hidden things that need to really be felt. And that's really what it's about, is the emotions that have been vanquished, to open them up and listen for it, to allow those to come through. And rewilding is about being okay with being a mess and crying in front of people that, especially people that you love, but maybe strangers, maybe crying in front of a stranger is just what they needed to soften. I remember when I was in acupuncture school and I was feeling these emotions and I was crying, and my acupuncturist, the student in the clinic, said, "You're lucky, you're not afraid to cry." And I just thought of this stoic male energy that if they could only cry, that they could release some of that pent up energy. So this is from the amazing Tokopod Turner and her book, Belonging. Learning to grieve well must begin with the self. There are ruins in each of us, a place where what once was lives on like an echo, haunting the landscape of our lives with its weathered foundations. Abandoned, scavenged, and dismantled by time, the ruin is the holiest place in our heart. It is the ways in which we have been broken that have earned us a place to stand. It is in our life's absences that a wild longing is born. This ruined place is a temple in which to worship, to throw down our grief and our forgetting, and praise what remains. After all, these remains are the evidence of how greatly we have loved, and they should be venerated as the legacy of survival that they are. Really interesting how she said there is a tradition it's in Guatemala, the Mayan tradition, in which there are women whose job it is to grieve on behalf of those who are stuck with inability to touch their own grief. Wow. We are powerful. We are grieving for people. It reminds me of, it is a shamanic tradition. And it reminds me of a ceremony that I was in that the two women were just singing me the song of my soul. And I was just sitting there crying. And I just really felt that those channels needed to be unlocked and better out than in, just letting that grief be felt and letting those waters flow. So as we move into Pluto and Aquarius, as we move Venus into Aquarius, letting that water flow, letting us rebirth ourselves from that water as the divine, beautiful beings that we are. Thank you for listening to the end. I would love it if you would share the show and help me spread the community and spread the love. I've been offering a monthly activation for people who want to be spiritual entrepreneurs and want to network, so we can share our gifts, our challenges. What have we been going through in this crazy world that we live in? And then allowing us to receive some clearing in different topics related to entrepreneurs. So please connect with me also. We feel that you're a kindred spirit, and I would love to know you.